Welcome to a joint virtual event with Flyleaf Books of Chapel Hill and Boswell Book Company of Milwaukee. And so I would love to introduce Maggie Rowe from Flyleaf Books to say a few words and also introduce tonight's authors.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Daniel, and welcome to Dan, Jamie, and everyone tuning in. I'm Maggie Rowe, the Marketing Events Manager at Flyleaf Books in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and we're thrilled to be co-sponsoring this event, Boswell Books. I worked with Dan 25-ish years ago at the Bull's Head Bookshop, UNC's quirky independent bookstore that was the place to be, the best place to be in the 90s, especially if you love books and funny people like Dan. While the Bull's Head, he founded the Youth Angst Society reading series, published a very memorable staff calendar with our mutual friend Claire, and he was the instigator of many other tremendously hilarious antics. I followed his career as it took him to DC and then NYC and back again, with the year in Hawaii thrown in, which made me very jealous at the time in my early 20s. Along the way, he did creative and increasingly more successful writerly things, first blogs, then essays, then books, and he created some children with his wife, Alia, and then some podcasts. He scored a book deal to take their family around the world for his very funny memoir, How to Be a Family, which we love to hand sell at Flyleaf. Vintage Contemporaries is his first novel, and the humor and charm that Dan brings to the table is all over this book, and I can say that it is delightful. Jami Attenberg, I don't know you personally, but if you're one of Dan's people, then you're one of my people, and I can say that you are a terrific writer. We have your books for sale at our bookstore, and I highly recommend I Came All This Way to Meet You, which is out now in paperback. Thank you for moderating this conversation, and if folks have any questions, you can put them in the chat, and she will get to them later in the talk. So thank you, Daniel.
Hi, Dan's going to read in a second, but I just wanted to say congratulations to Dan. This is his wonderful book, which you can buy. There's links to buy. And I'm just really honored to celebrate the launch of this book with him, which I've been hearing about for a while now. And I've known Dan for a while, but only online. This is our first time seeing each other in person, I think, which we will get to in a little bit. But first, Dan's going to read for us.
Thank you, Jamie, and thank you, Maggie, and thank you, Daniel. I love Boswell's and I love Flyleaf. They are my two favorite indie bookstores in this country, and so I'm so honored and pleased that they are co-sponsoring this event. I'm going to do a very, very, very short read from a section of the book that takes place in 1993 on the Lower East Side of New York. Our two main characters are, confusingly, Em and Emily, best friends. Emily, our main characters, friendly but a little bit clueless sister and brother-in-law, are in from Wisconsin for one of their first visits ever to New York. And here's what happens. To the Big Apple, Mark said. To my big sister, Em added. Anne-Marie smiled. You know, Emily announced, drying her hair with paper towels, the name the Big Apple comes from a whorehouse. She had their attention and continued happily. Yeah, there was a brothel down in the Bowery in the 1800s. The woman who ran it was named Eve something. She was French, very fancy. She liked to call her girls Eve's Apples. So then when people called New York the Big Apple, it was usually disparaging, the city of whorehouses. I suppose that's not how you meant it. She looked at Mark. Who are you? This is Emily, Em said into the silence of the room, and introduced her sister and her husband. Did you lose your umbrella? She asked. You're drenched. Who the fuck carries an umbrella around? Said Emily. That is fascinating about the Big Apple, Mark said. Where did you read that? Emily shrugged. I've done a lot of research for a piece I'm working on that's about New York history, but that's just a thing that New Yorkers know. It wasn't a thing that Em knew. For years afterward, she would bring this amazing fact up in conversation at parties until a historian told her it was completely untrue.
Thank you for that. I'm really excited to talk to you about this book, but before we get into it, I looked today to see the first time we ever emailed each other, which was in October of 2012, which I pitched you and you turned me down.
Obviously that was an error.
No, it was probably correct. And I think that it was like, I can't bring myself to actually read the pitch, but I like, cause it's in a Word document, so safely. So I didn't have to see it. You'll
never have to experience that again.
I'll never have to know, but I know that it was about being a member of the creative class.
I mean, that's a beloved topic at slate.com. So I sort of can't believe I said no.
You were like, yeah, it's not, kind of basically it was like, it's not special enough, but it only took you, I think 48 hours to reply, which is really nice. And later on you did, I think you approached me next to write something for you.
I did, yes.
Maybe about New Orleans, is that
It's
right?
an extremely good New Orleans piece that I still love.
Yeah. Thanks. And so we've known each other from that. And then we can talk a little bit later about how we know each other in another way. But it's been 11 years of knowing you, or 10 and a half years of knowing you. And so I'm glad to see this new version of you where you're now a debut novelist.
It's very fun to have this relationship with a person that has existed totally online, and then to have this combo online and real life in-person meeting. And probably someday we'll meet in person. I feel like I know you a little bit. You write very well in your newsletter. You tell me about yourself. I've read your memoir, and but even more than that, I have just seen the way you are online, which is like fun and also surprisingly normal for a person who's online.
I think you're probably surprisingly normal too. Yeah. But it is like a very modern relationship. But what's interesting to me is that you're writing about kind of like an old-fashioned relationship in this book,
Extremely
right?
analog.
And so, yeah, which is like very soothing and very charming to read. I guess what the first question I have is just tell me about the moment of inception for this book. Tell me how you found your way in, which characters, I have a feeling which character's voice you heard first, but just tell me about that aha moment for you.
It wasn't really an aha moment as much as it was a oh crap moment, which is that I turned 40 and I had a minor midlife crisis about the fact that I had not written any fiction in almost 2 decades, even though I ostensibly had a master's degree in writing fiction. I did an MFA in my early 20s, and it did not go well. And it scared me away from fiction for a really long time. And then I turned 40 and I was like, I thought I was a person who makes things up and tells stories. And that's not anything I've done forever. And why is that? And so the first thing that came to me wasn't really a character at all. It was pretty much a time and place. It was 1990s New York City, because I basically started every night at 10:45 p.m. after my kids had gone to bed and I'd finished whatever work I hadn't gotten done for my day job. I would sit out on the porch and turn on some music and drink a beer and do a Lindaberry writing exercise, and those would just constantly send me back to like 90s New York City, off on the Lower East Side. And so that was the inception of it. And I spent basically 4 years writing these little fragments in various Google Docs that had names like, IDK or WTF or some bullshit. And then after doing that for 4 years, I sort of assembled them all together and thought, and put my editor brain in charge for a minute and said, okay, let's say hypothetically that all these fragments were the beginning of a book. What kind of book would it be? And who would the people be? And that is where it was really born. That is where I discovered I had 2 different characters who had a friendship that fell apart in some way, that they were in New York in the 90s and then in the 2000s, and that something was going on with art and the struggle to make a life in the world of art.
Okay, and 2 female characters.
Yeah.
So why?
So that was sort of a kludge very early in the process. And this is like a semi basic response. It was not because I felt like I had a particularly inspirational insight into the female psyche. It was because I wanted to be writing fiction. I did not want to be writing memoir. I also write memoir in other worlds, for Slate and for other places. I wrote a book that's a memoir, but I did not want this to be me. I wanted to force myself to have it not be me. And so it became very useful as a rule that each night at 10:45, I would start writing something and I would remind myself that it was not me by just making the person who was talking a woman. It was like a dumb guy's way of remembering that this is a totally different person from myself.
Huh. And was there ever a moment where you were writing it in first person, or were you always doing this kind of close third?
It was a mix. I spent a lot of time writing M the person who ends up being our focus character in third person. And then I wrote a lot of Emily in first person. Emily, her friend, the sort of wilder, meaner one. And none of that stuff ended up in the book, but that was how I sort of found my way into her.
Into getting nowhere. Do you feel more comfortable in one versus the other? I'm always interested in talking about close third because I'm passionate about it myself. And I feel like I get, when I do a lot of interviews of authors, that's like the thing that I go to is wanting to know why they chose the perspective that they chose and the voice that they chose.
The first person stuff I was doing as Emily, I think was interesting. And it was fun to write, but it really took over the book in a way that I didn't like at all. And so I just ended up cutting all of it. And I wanted a much more detached third person vibe in this book because once again, I did not want at any point to be fooled into like just writing my own shit. But also I wanted to have this sense that we are attending these characters not only at this moment, but in all the moments of their lives. We're bouncing back and forth in time, and we have a narrator who's, right up with M, and can give that sense of perspective, can lead her down the paths that are useful for her to go down from a, fictional perspective.
Dan, we're always writing our own shit no matter what.
Sure, yeah, but I didn't want to be like
you didn't want to be so obvious about it. Yeah, right. Gotcha. Okay. And so can you talk a little bit about, so you're a journalist, a critic, a podcaster, a memoirist, or all of these kinds of things. Can you just tell me a little bit before we get in, because I do want to talk about those aspects of yourself too. Can you just talk to me about what you get out of writing fiction? And besides the fact that you're like, I can't believe I haven't done this yet. And I challenge myself to do this. I challenge myself to be this person. What did you get out of it? How does it fulfill you?
Right. There has to be something else, because shame can only get you through like a couple of years, maybe max.
I mean, it gets me through every day of my life, honestly, but
built my career out of shame.
Yeah.
No, I found it really satisfying and find it really satisfying to be making stuff up. Like, as a journalist, you are extremely not allowed to do that. You are very constrained by your reporting, by your reading, by what you find out about what you're doing. And I love that restriction when I'm writing journalism, when I'm writing memoir. My memoir, anything I write is usually a fairly reported personal story. Like, it's my memories, but I'm also going back to check them, sort of David Carr style. But I just loved being able to, at any given night say, I want to know what happens when I put these characters in the Strand, or I want to know what happens when I put these characters in a squat or wherever. I really loved that freedom, maybe reflecting the kind of kaleidoscopic way that the book itself was initially written. I love that I wasn't bound to anything. That was very freeing to someone who's bound by stuff a lot.
I do think that there are, I think, at least two characters that are based on real people, though, in this book, right? There's a Laurie Colwyn-esque character, and then I think even the designer, the book designer.
There's an actual Lorraine Louis, yes, the designer of Vintage Contemporaries.
This is who you wrote about in the New Yorker this week, which we will also get to in a second. And so how did you, and I've also written about my book, St. Maisie, I wrote about somebody that I was kind of inspired by them, and they're a real life person. And then I took the leap to fictionalize them. How responsible did you feel towards them? How did you, how much research did you decide to do before you just decided you were just going to like take the leap? Talk about that a little bit, because I feel like anybody who it's of interest to anyone who might be writing something that's kind of historical fiction, which this is.
Yeah. This is, the 90s are now history. As you said, there's two characters who are sort of touched by reality in this book. And one of them is the sort of the third person in the friend triangle that makes up the core of the story, who's an older woman named Lucy. By older, I mean when the Emilys are in their 20s, Lucy is in her 40s. She's a friend of M's mom, from college who has written a couple of novels, and as many people who work in book publishing do, M gets set up with her in a kind of like literary Yenta type situation, and discovers in fact that she likes her book and thinks as an agent's assistant she maybe can even sell that book. And she is inspired by Laurie Colwin, a writer who I really love and who particularly was a kind of guiding light for this book, because I wanted to write a book. If I was going to be writing a book at 10:45 every night and trying to wake up happy the next day, I just wanted to write something that was about being happy and just generally like not miserable and depressing and not even particularly complicated, but was just like fun, because I wanted to be having fun while I was doing it. And with that character, because I didn't want to write Laurie Colwin, I didn't think that was fair to someone who is like who really has an enormous literary profile and whose books are crucially important to so many people. I did basically no research at all on her. I had read everything. And so, a lot about both her aesthetic and also herself, because she wrote a couple of memoirs in recipes. But I didn't basically read anything else other than that. And I just created a sort of altered, imagined version of her on the Upper West Side, who it turns out doesn't in the details resemble her that much at all, but in the sort of broad sweep does. But then for Lorraine Louie, who is the graphic designer who designed the Vintage Contemporaries line of Random House paperbacks that were launched in 1984. Many people will know them because of Bright Lights Big City, which was one of the first books on that line. But they all had similar, very stylish 80s covers. And I wanted my character, I wanted M to meet someone who represented to her a kind of a version of publishing glamour and glory. But I didn't want her to it didn't seem that much fun for me to write like a famous, like for her to meet Jay McInerney or something, or a fake Jay McInerney. I wanted her to meet someone who worked in publishing like her, but who had like what she anticipated was the version of the glamorous publishing life she was obviously headed towards. And so then she meets this woman who designs these books that she's crazy about, that she thinks are like the ne plus ultra of literary publishing. And I was curious about what that would be like. And so I did actually do quite a lot of research on that, to the point of calling Lorraine Louie's widower, who's a graphic designer named Danny Pelavin, to ask his permission, but also to interview him about his wife and to ask, what was she like? What was she doing at this time? How did she feel about the covers that she made? And from him, I discovered a truly amazing and incredibly fictionally useful fact, which was that book publishing drove her nuts and she was desperate to get out of it. And by the time that she got very ill in the 90s, she really was thinking that she wanted to, in fact, get out of design entirely, maybe just become a nurse. And she died in 1999 of breast cancer. Danny still speaks very beautifully about her and the life that she lived. And so then the fictional leap I was able to take with her was to do something a little different with her that I hope Danny forgives me for, which is to just have her not die.
That's very sweet. So your journalistic impulses did sort of find their way into this.
Yeah, and that's a real like late game move. It was sort of like I'd spent 4 years writing with pure freedom. And then at some point I thought, okay, do I want this to be a book? Am I so idealistic and devoted to fiction as an art that is simply for self-betterment that I don't even care it's a book? It turns out I'm not, and I did care. And so I tried to figure out, well, how do I shape this thing into the book that it maybe seems like it could be? And that meant a lot of rewriting and fixing, and then figuring out where the holes were. And as an editor, holes to me often mean, okay, this is something that you can fill with a little bit of inspiration and a little bit of research or reporting. And so that is how the squats became such a big deal in the book. That is how Lorraine Louie became such a big deal in the book, because those are things where I knew it needed a thing. And I didn't trust my 1045 boozy brain to magically come up with the thing. So I've thought of it as, well, what is the thing it needs and what are the actual tasks I can accomplish to supply them?
I mean, so you mentioned the squats, which I would love for you to talk a little bit more about. But what's amazing is that this week, the week that your book came out, you have an article in New York Magazine and a piece in New Yorker, which is like pretty great for a debut novelist. Now, we know you're like a little bit more than a debut novelist because you're an editor. You have had several books before this. So you know how it works and you have connections and you've written for all these places before and everything like that. But let me just say, I saw that and I was like, Dan did his homework. Dan did a very good job this week. He like
no
did
less
all the
than Taffy Brodesser Ackner said, wow, I thought I did a lot of self-promotion.
That's not what you did though. You wrote valuable pieces.
Thank you.
Right? Like they were I read them. They were pieces of substance. They were interesting. I mean, that is self-promotion.
Let's say they're both. Yeah.
Yeah, but like, I mean, it's a lot of work to do it. Self-promotion is part of it, certainly, but it's you know when it's filler and when it's not.
And it is fun to take the stuff that I learned to write this book, but that I could only include the teensiest little parts of, or that I had to fictionalize in some way, or that I wanted to fictionalize in some way, and like give them a little place of pride in a couple of different publications to say, look how interesting this is. Shouldn't everyone else be just as interested as me in the 13th Street squat eviction of 1995?
And you knew how to form a narrative around it. I think I love the New Yorker piece the most because I loved those books too. You know, the pieces about those vintage covers. And I wish I had, maybe somebody could throw it in the chat or something. If anyone knows Dan and knows the piece, could throw it in the chat so everyone can read it. But otherwise, you can look for it afterwards. But I loved, of course, that personal story about her, but those covers had an impact on me. I was, sitting in the Midwest reading Bret Easton Ellis, sitting in suburbs of Chicago and thinking, well, I don't know, should I go to New York? Like that sounds both terrible and delightful. And those covers were really kind of a part of it. They felt, oh, look, Daniel Golden threw that in there. That's great. It's in the chat.
For I think many people of roughly our generation, reading like Bright Lights, Big City, reading Jami Attenberg was a way of thinking about, oh, do I want to be a literary person?
Yeah.
Do I have what it takes to do that much coke?
Right. No. Yeah. Sadly, yes. But that does not mean that's not what you need to do in order to be a writer. Don't do drugs, kids. Anyway, I love those pieces. I love what you wrote, and not everybody knows how to form a story out of their research. We like, in terms of like having it live in the nonfiction world, like there's a lot of picking and choosing of details and what you want to do with them. So that was really exciting. Do you feel like going forward that and I have two other things I want to talk to you about, but just going forward, do you feel like, wow, I really want to keep writing fiction? I feel like I really missed writing, focusing my energy on journalism. Like, how do you see it like playing out for you? Did it feel addictive to you? Do you feel like, yes, I want to keep doing this?
I do. Yeah. And I am. And so I'm deep into another thing now. I'm happy to say that I like and am excited about, and was born in a similar way, but happily has not been as stupid of a process. So I'm hopeful that it will not in the end take 8 years between having the crisis and publishing the book the way that it did for this one. Thinking of a more normal, reasonable, like 3 to 4 year span.
Right. That sounds good.
Yeah.
Yes. Especially if you have, although are you going to have an empty house soon? You have one kid?
We have a couple of years to go until we have an empty house. 3 years from now. Yes. I'll have a lot of time on my hands.
Yeah.
Then you'll write who knows what magic happens then.
Yeah. Okay. So, and I also want to just say that, I have appreciated the fact that you have been a participant in 1,000 Words of Summer, which is something that I don't want to make this about me at all, but it's been really great that you've been a part of it and that you wrote something for the newsletter about it, and you have cheered it on.
This book
online.
exists as a real book in a lot of ways, I think, because of 1,000 Words of Summer, because that was the thing I used when I got to the sort of molding and shaping part. And I said, all right, it's just going to take a bunch of words to do the things that I need to do. I need like a spur to make me write those words, even though it's not going to be like free and beautiful and just a bunch of Linda Berry hoo-ha. I like need something to kick my ass and make me do it. And doing 100 words, I believe in the summer of 2020, the first pandemic summer, when I was when slate.com, the website that I work for, had somehow managed to gently bend the unemployment laws of Washington, D.C. to allow a bunch of people to take unemployment so that Slate didn't have to pay them, so that they wouldn't have to lay a bunch of us off during the pandemic downturn. So I suddenly had more free time than I expected. And so I used that 100,000 words of summer to create basically all of the material that turned it from a bunch of random crap into a real actual book. And I was so grateful for that.
That's
and for
good.
what you emailed out, and for like the little community that you've created. Anyone who is listening to this or watching this, who's looking for a way to sort of kickstart the thing you wish you were writing, I really recommend 1,000 Words of Summer, Jami's newsletter, and also magical writing program.
Magical, my magical imaginary. It's magical because it's imaginary. It's all made up. But yeah. Also, I wanted to say, I think it's great also for people who don't even have anything that they want to do, but they just feel like they want to like experiment a little bit or explore writing. That is always like the most touchy. I've been working on this 1,000 words book now for since the summer, and it's almost done. And the thing about it that I've really enjoyed looking at all these contributors, contributing letters, and like the new stuff that I've written for is like, it's just really about encouraging people to put their thoughts down on paper more than anything else. I mean,
in that way, it's very similar, and I think very much in the spirit of Linda Berry's teaching, which I've referred to a lot, but which truly is about finding a way to say things that you want to say, and worrying later about how they fit into your vision of yourself as a writer or not a writer. And so I like both of these ideas of ways to get yourself working a lot, and I find them very simpatico.
Yeah, but I think maybe mine is more about the accrual of words.
That's
like
correct.
things piling up, and hers is I haven't. It's weird, but I don't read a lot of other creativity kinds of things because I don't. It's not that I don't need it. It's just that I'm so already ensconced in my universe. Right. But I people mention Linda Berry to me the most and then like maybe like Bird by Bird and stuff like that. I'm sure whatever works, man. Right. Whatever works. Okay, I have two more things I'm going to ask you about. We're at 6:30 now, I think, so we have a little bit more time. The first thing I want to ask you about is you went to the HarperCollins strike.
I sure did. I got to picket outside the News Corp building. It was very exciting. I felt like I was picketing at the gates of hell.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
So for those who are watching who maybe do not know about this, my book is published by HarperCollins.
Mine also.
Yes. Oh, yes, that's right.
Yes.
And I have loved my experience with HarperCollins in every way but one. But the but one is a big one, which is that since November, about 200 junior employees of HarperCollins have been on strike. It's the only unionized one of the big 5. Are there now 5 publishing houses? 4, soon to be 3. Who can say? Of the big New York publishing houses, it's the only one that has a union, and they've been working without a contract for quite some time. They went on strike in November. Since they went on strike 51 days ago, the company has refused to even come to the bargaining table. And I find that really upsetting and frustrating, because I'm a union member, because I really believe in paying people what they deserve, but also because a lot of this book is about working and publishing as a young person and feeling exploited, and then working and publishing as an older person, and realizing the ways that you are in some way responsible for the exploitation of other people. And so it's a real bummer to me that this is still going on. So I just urge anyone who is watching this, who does not know about this, to read about the strike, to maybe support the strike fund if you're a supporter of organized labor, or of just people who work on books getting paid what they deserve. They're not getting paid right now by HarperCollins.
And they're asking basically for everyone to get a $5,000 a year raise, right? They're
Right.
just trying to get raised.
They're not even asking for everyone. They're asking for the base salary to raise from $45,000 to $5,000 in
to
New York City.
$50,000 in New York City, which is like the most expensive city.
Right.
And
where it costs $50,000. You know, it costs $50,000 in New York City just to go to the dentist.
Yeah. So anyway, we support those people out there. And now they're trying to hire people to cross the picket line and do, and I think it's hard for the people who are not on the picket line too, because everybody wants to just work together and publish good books. So
yeah, I mean, yes, my editor and my publicist are too senior to be in the union. I know that their lives have been very difficult for the last 50 work days because they don't have their colleagues, because their company is so divided, and because they have a shitload more work, which also sucks for them. And so, yes. And so thinking about this book and how a surprising amount of it ended up being about work, and about the way that M thinks about work and working in publishing in the 90s, and then how she thinks about it in the 2000s. And a lot of it is like a kind of a celebration of the good work that editors do, and the way that editing is not exactly an art, but it is a craft that brings art into the world. And I'm proud of editors and editing. And so I really want to be able to celebrate my publishing house soon. So get it together, folks.
Get it together, HarperCollins and Fox.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really get it together.
It's
News
kind of
Corp
Fox. It's
is
a
my
little bit of Fox
impression
News Corp.
of what's happening here. Yeah.
Yeah, they are like, we don't really negotiate.
Right.
Okay. So anyway, there's two questions that are in the chat right now. Obviously, y'all, you have like a great font of information here about across many like territories in the publishing and writing world. So don't be shy. But I just really quickly, and this is very niche, so if you haven't seen Tar yet, I'm sorry, but we're just going to talk about it for like 2 seconds, because Dan wrote this great piece that went viral on Slate about Tar, the movie. And it's like about like kind of like some conspiracy ghost theories about this. If you could summarize it in 3 sentences. So you somehow not give anything away, but like entice people to go see the movie.
You may, if you haven't seen Tar, you may have heard people describe it as, oh, it's like a cancel culture movie about a female conductor who does bad stuff and then she gets
Cate
canceled.
Blanchett.
Right, played by Cate Blanchett. My argument is that, in fact, Tar is a horror movie / ghost story in which nearly the entire final hour does what you see on the screen may or may not represent what is actually happening in the life of its character. And in fact, she's just going totally bonkers. And we are seeing the paranoid, haunted inside of her brain in different forms. And it's so much more fun as a movie that way.
It really is. And I feel like, okay, so I saw it and I was like, I had some, like you definitely have to see it a couple of times. Like, I don't know if you thought it right away on your first screening of it, but you probably thought, oh, there's something more going on. But
I thought there's something weird going on, because why are there people in the background of shots who have red hair? What the fuck is going on with that?
Right. So you wanted to want to see it again. I only saw it once. But I was like, I thought about it, definitely that movie for a couple of days afterwards. It's sort of like, it like sinks into your brain. It's a really smart, and she's so great. The performance so great. And it's so like gorgeous. And it's like a fantasy life of just traveling around the world. And she's got these beautifully tailored suits, and everyone's fascinating and interesting and dramatic. And it's great. But then I read your piece and I was like, well, now I can't stop thinking about that.
It's a very chewy movie already. Like, there's so much in it that is fun to think about and talk about. It's like a great, like, I wish I'd been able to see it in the theater and like go out to a bar afterwards and yell about it with people.
Yeah.
Instead, I just wrote 2,500 words and yelled about it on the internet. But it also really lends itself to a bunch of fun, weird interpretations, because Todd Field, who wrote and directed it, clearly is having a great time larding it with a lot of weird stuff, in hopes that people will come to all kinds of different conclusions. And I really enjoy that. And it really frustrated me to see it reduced in so much of the writing about it, to, well, is cancel culture real? Which is like the most boring possible way to think about that movie.
Yeah. Okay, let's do some of the Q&A questions. Kate asks, why name the characters Em and Emily?
Great question, and one I have asked myself quite a lot over the last few years while copy editing and then attempting to talk about the novel. Basically, it seemed like the easiest gift I could give myself, which is that I'm named Daniel. That is as Daniel Golden can attest, that is a fairly common name for boys of my generation. I've never been the only Daniel in any elementary or middle school or high school class. There always were at least 3 or 4 other ones. One of my best friends in college and afterwards was also named Daniel. And so, and I think a lot of people in our generation, in the people coming up with interesting names generation, I think a lot of us have this experience of being very close with someone who just literally has the same name as you, which creates a bunch of unintentional comedy in your life. And I thought, what a gift that I'm writing about friendships of your 20s and how you subsume each other into this kind of unit that is not one of you or the other, but is instead both of you annihilating each other in a way, which is both beautiful and terrible. What a gift to just be able to just give them the same name and make everyone else have as hard a time telling them apart as they do themselves. Of course, what it meant was that I made a million mistakes all over the book and then tried to fix them all. And then the copy editor found more. And there's still like 4 mistakes in the galley that we sent out to press. And I think I fixed them, but someday someone is going to find another Emily mistake in the book and I'm going to lose it.
Okay, can't wait. I look forward to that tweet online. The writing process, anonymous attendee, hello. Sort of sexy sounding anonymous attendee. The writing process has lots of false starts and plot lines that are not pursued. How do you deal with those? Do you have editors in real time, friends who gave notes? Who is in your circle of trust for those decisions?
I did not have any editors in real time for the first until I had a full draft of this book. I simply could not face the idea of subjecting my friends and trusted readers to a thing that I wasn't even sure was a thing. I know I should probably get over that. I have readers who I love, many of whom are in fact in Chapel Hill or Milwaukee, who have never given me anything but good advice. But the idea of sending them something that I wasn't even positive was a book, and then having them come back and be like, well, thanks for having me read this thing that's not a book, was like too much to bear. When I had a thing that I thought resembled a book, I then, sent it to a group of close readers, including someone from that MFA program. So it wasn't a total waste, the MFA program that I did, and also a bunch of other close friends from college and elsewhere and later in my writing life who were very useful. But the way I dealt with all the false starts and the stuff that didn't work is I just threw it away and I was like, oh, well, that's just, that's the way it goes when you're writing a novel for the first time in 18 years and your last one was abandoned halfway through.
I'm curious, I don't think you said this in this, I think you said it before we got on. You talked about like the MFA program you were in being discouraging. I did not do an MFA program, so I love when people talk shit about MFA programs.
Sure.
Can you tell me why it was discouraging?
Let me give you a little of that sweet schadenfreude. It was not discouraging, I don't think, because of any particular fault of the program itself. Although maybe I would have found faults if my faults were not so glaring and obvious and had not taken over my experience.
Was this your Bret Easton Ellis years? Is that what you're about to tell us?
No, that was not the problem. It was the problem was the opposite. It was that I was working full time while I was in this MFA program because I did not go to a funded program foolishly. I should not have done an MFA when I was 22. I wasn't ready. I didn't have enough to write about. I didn't have a good enough sense of what a kind of book I would even want to write. All I knew was that I wanted to be an author. And so then I applied to a bunch of programs, none of which had money. And then I took out a bunch of loans and worked full time through the program. So I was stressed out and couldn't focus very well. And then I spent like a year writing half of a novel that was terrible. That was like a very serious, intense, gritty literary thriller. which I think I'm not actually constitutionally capable of writing, but I didn't understand that about myself. And then I gave up and just like did it. Like my thesis was just a bunch of workshop stories with a title on the front of it.
Yeah.
And so it convinced me for a really long time that I must not actually really be a fiction writer, because I had, 3 whole years devoted to being a fiction writer. And at the end of it, I was frustrated and annoyed, and had written half of a thing that was bad.
It's not your spirit. I'm just going back to the thing that you said about it's not your constitution, because I wrote down this line from the book, which is, it is miserable to be unhappy about things I have no control over, so I'm going to stop. But you wrote a very
We're at that
book.
easy, but
Yeah,
yes,
but you
kind
wrote,
of.
you
That
wrote a
is
book
certainly
to make
what I
yourself
try.
feel better. Yeah,
That is definitely how I've tried to live my life. And sometimes I fail and sometimes I succeed. But like, I did make a conscious decision at some point in somewhere around those years. Like, it is definitely not worth it to just like drive myself insane about shit that I can't do anything about. Like, so like, just try not to be miserable all the time, Kois.
that's really great wisdom there. Try not to be miserable all the
Not to
time.
be fucking miserable.
Okay, I want to end on that note, but I see that there's somebody who wants to ask you one really specific question, which is, will there ever be a Slate Authority podcast season 3? I know the HBO season already aired, but I missed your analysis.
This is a wonderful question. I'm deeply sorry to say that The Authority, our podcast about His Dark Materials, has been canceled by the magisterium. I'm actually doing this chat from a chamber deep in the heart of Geneva, where the magisterium is holding me and Laura. We may never get out, and we are going to be unable to recap the season. Laura Miller did write a great piece about the entire season, which I urge you to read on Slate, but there will not be a season 3. I'm sorry.
I feel like we just were on a podcast there for a second. All right. Well, so
how's your mattress, Jamie? Do you feel like your mattress is really good? Does it support your back? Because I got great news for you.
I don't really listen to podcasts, but I sometimes do. This is the most obvious thing to say, to go to sleep, because everyone's voices are so nice on them. And then I just fall asleep. So I don't know if I've ever actually heard a podcast from beginning to middle to end.
You've never gotten to the ad break, so you don't even know.
I know what the ad breaks are.
That's
probably when I fall asleep, but I've never bought a new mattress.
On your
this entire
presumably
time.
Great mattress, so you don't need
You're right. All right. Well, I think we're going to be looking forward to another book from you, another novel from you someday, right? I feel like
I
that's
hope so.
in the cards. What can you tell us a little bit about it?
It has been read by some friends, and one of them described it as gentle It, which is to say Stephen King's It, except for that everyone's going to be okay and no one's going to get hurt.
Oh, that's really sweet. All right. Well, I think we can end there. It was really great to talk to you. I hope we do get to see each other in person, and I'm really so excited for people to read this book. I think people will really love it. It's like a very charming book that like really captures a very specific moment in time. And these 2 female characters are very engaging, and you care about them, and you want to spend time with them, and you want to know what happens to them at the end. So congratulations.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you so much for doing this. Shall we toast, please?
Ding.
Ding. Thanks everyone who came. I'm really grateful to everyone who joined us. And thank you so much to Boswell and to Flyleaf, America's 2 greatest indie bookstores. I love you guys both.
There is a link to purchase from Flyleaf in the chat. If you want to purchase from Boswell, you just switch it to Boswell Books from Flyleaf Books, or buy it at your favorite independent bookstore, something.books.com. Thank you both for a wonderful evening. Thank you to Maggie for working with us on this program.
Thanks, everyone.